A ragged little boy tugged at the sleeve of a millionaire, his small hand surprisingly strong. He pointed toward an old, heavily rusted hatch, almost swallowed by the parched earth of a dry, barren field. What emerged after that hatch was finally agonizingly open left and the millionaire frozen in place. A chasm of remembered pain cracking open within him. "He's down there, my brother." Noah, a frail boy of about 8, stood silently in the scorched field, the vast, indifferent sky arching above. His threadbare shirt, a ghost of some brighter color, was worn thin at the shoulders, exposing the sharp jut of his bones. One bony finger, resolute and unwavering, pointed toward the rusted metal hatch half hidden in the yellowing, tinder-dry weeds. Not long before that moment, Noah had stood for hours by the side of a dusty country road, clutching an old creased photograph, his only tangible link to a life stolen. Cars had sped by one after another, kicking up clouds of acrid red dust that caked his face and stung his eyes. No one stopped. No one looked back. Indifference was a familiar companion. One woman, her face etched with a fleeting pity, finally did pull over. She pressed a few coins into his dirt-stained hand. Noah shook his head, the movement almost imperceptible. "I'm not asking for money," he said softly, his voice barely a whisper against the vast silence of the plains. Startled, she asked what he meant, her curiosity tinged with unease. Noah raised the photograph, its edges softened with handling, and pointed out across the desolate, empty field. "My brother's alive. I'm looking for him." She chuckled awkwardly, a nervous sound that offered no comfort, and drove off, leaving Noah alone with the diminishing sound of her engine fading into the uncaring distance. A middle-aged man, his face a road map of disappointments, had once muttered, "Sure, kid, maybe he's up on Mars. I'm still looking for the years I lost to my 20s. Then he walked away. No one took what Noah said seriously. His quiet certainty was too easily dismissed as delusion, his pleas lost in the echo of their own cynical resignation. But this time was different. A sleek black car out of place in this forgotten corner of the world came to a smooth stop. The window rolled down, slowly revealing a man whose eyes held a shadow that Noah recognized. The shadow of loss. The man inside didn't speak right away. He just looked at the boy. His name was Nathaniel Grayson, a once celebrated entrepreneur in educational technology, a self-made millionaire whose innovations had promised brighter futures for countless children. But after his own daughter's sudden, senseless death, he had walked away from everything. The accolades, the boardrooms, the empire he'd built, it all felt like ashes. He'd been driving aimlessly across states ever since a modern-day nomad, fleeing familiar faces and old, painful obligations. A hole had opened in his life, vast and silent one, for which he'd never found words, only the endless hum of tires on asphalt and the occasional sharp pang of an anonymous letter that would find its way to his P.O. box, filled with cryptic warnings about old enemies and unfinished business in towns he'd barely known he'd passed through. When Nathaniel first saw Noah, a thin, spectral frame with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and gnawing hunger, yet standing tall with an almost unnerving stillness, he didn't understand why he didn't just drive on like everyone else. Perhaps it was because the boy didn't ask for anything, didn't plead or whine. Or maybe it was something in that boy's eyes, a raw, unwavering intensity that made him stop. But it wasn't just that. Nathaniel saw the old photograph Noah held clutched in his small, chapped hands. He noticed the way those tiny fingers clung to it, tight, desperate, as if it were the last thread tying him to this harsh world, the only proof of a bond that others denied. And in that moment, an image flashed across Nathaniel's mind, sharp and exquisitely painful. Sylvia Grayson, his daughter. She'd once had an old rag doll worn, frayed, its button eyes loose, falling apart at the seams. But it had been her whole world, her silent confidant. She never let it out of her sight. An inanimate object, yes, but sacred to her, imbued with a love that defied logic. The way Noah held that photograph, that steady, almost unreal determination etched on his young face, it stirred something deeply, uncomfortably familiar in Nathaniel. It wasn't just sympathy, a rich man's fleeting concern for a pauper child. It was a pull, a strange aching intuition that something important, something he couldn't afford to ignore, was unfolding on this desolate patch of earth. He didn't know why he'd stopped, but a sudden fierce conviction told him he had to. He remembered Sylvia asking a child's profound question, "Daddy, if I was lost, would you look for me everywhere?" He'd promised he would, a promise unkept he often felt. Noah looked Nathaniel squarely in the eyes, a gaze too old for his years, then pointed again at the rusty hatch hidden in the tall, dead grass. "My brother, he's down there." His voice was soft, barely audible, but steady, brimming with a quiet, unwavering belief that felt almost like a physical force. Nathaniel didn't respond right away. He turned his head slowly, following the boy's gesture. There, in the middle of the scorched earth, surrounded by brittle grass and the stubble of forgotten crops, lay a forgotten iron hatch, weather-beaten and almost swallowed by the indifferent land. Its surface, its very placement in the otherwise unremarkable field, reminded him of something. A detail from a barely recalled land survey map, a contentious proposal his company had flatly rejected years ago due to ethical concerns about development over unstable, historically significant ground. The Prentice Mine. The thought skittered away, too nebulous, too unsettling. "What did you say?" he asked, his own voice sounding hollow. "My brother's under there. Eli. I've heard him through the hatch. I know he's there." "What's your name?" "Noah." Nathaniel studied him for a long moment. The boy's eyes were dry, unnervingly so. No tears. But the gaze they held was strangely fierce, far too resolute for someone so young. It was the look of someone who had seen too much and been believed too little. "You know Noah." Nathaniel found himself saying a rawness in his own voice. Sometimes believing is the hardest part, especially when no one else does. "Why do you think your brother's under that thing?" "I don't think. I know." Noah's small chin jutted out. "I've been here 3 days. Every morning I knock. Every morning I hear 3 knocks back. But this morning, nothing. Just a cough. Faint. And then quiet." A shadow of dread flickered in Noah's eyes. Silence fell heavy and palpable. Nathaniel looked around. No houses, no people. Just endless stretches of red dust, hardened ground, and a scrawny child calmly asserting what sounded like madness, yet with a sudden desperate edge to his conviction. "Let me see the picture." Noah held it out. Nathaniel took it, his hands trembling slightly. And just for a second, an old memory stirred sharp as glass. A similar photograph tucked away in a box he could no longer bear to open. His daughter Sylvia, standing with her best friend at summer camp, hand in hand, freckles dancing on their noses. Grinning, their smiles caught just before they bloomed into full, unrestrained laughter. A breath caught in Nathaniel's throat. He inhaled slowly, forcing the memory down, and returned the photo to Noah's waiting hand. Then he stepped toward the hatch. The iron surface was coarse, pitted with rust, scratched by time and neglect. He knelt, his expensive trousers brushing against the gritty soil, and tapped on it. 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Silence. Utter silence. Not even the cough Noah described. Nathaniel felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He tapped again, harder. Then after a few long seconds, seconds that seemed to stretch like a hot summer afternoon with no breeze, 3 faint knocks answered back. So faint they were barely there, like the ghost of a sound weaker than before, but undeniably real. Thump, thump, thump. Then a scraping sound, and another very weak cough. Nathaniel's brow furrowed. He rose slowly, his eyes fixed on the hatch, as if it were a serpent about to strike. Something stirred in his chest, not just from the sound below, but from within. A feeling he hadn't let surface in years, something like sorrow, finally catching its breath, mingling with a nascent, dangerous hope. "Come here, Noah. Help me." He tried to lift one edge, but it was fused shut by rust and time. "We need something to pry it with." Noah's eyes scanned the vicinity. Then he pointed to the trunk of Nathaniel's car. "Is there a tire iron or something strong?" Nathaniel retrieved it. Together they strained, breathing hard, sweat forming on Nathaniel's brow despite the dry heat. His back began to ache, a dull throb of unaccustomed labor, but he didn't stop. A minute passed. 2. The hatch didn't budge, its rusted hinges groaning in protest, but holding firm. It was sealed tight, as if guarding a terrible secret. Suddenly, a dry clicking sound came from beneath the hatch, followed by a hiss like escaping air. Noah jumped back. What was that? Nathaniel paused, panting a new alarm prickling his skin. "I don't know. But this isn't just stuck." He looked at the boy, whose small face was taut with exertion and fierce hope now shadowed with fear. "I think we'll need more help, and better tools. Is there anyone nearby?" Noah thought for a moment, his brow furrowed. "Mr. Isaac. He's a farmer around here, lives alone. I've seen him a few times, but I'm the only one who knows the shortcut to his place. His house has a red roofway at the end of that field beyond the old creek bed." Noah's voice held a quiet pride in this knowledge. He once told my mother he knew about being overlooked. He tried to help a lost calf once, but everyone said it was long gone. He found it, though." Nathaniel exhaled a heavy sound. "Lead the way." Noah nodded, his small frame already moving, and started walking, a small, determined silhouette against the harsh landscape. Nathaniel followed behind, a profound heaviness in his steps, and echoing in his mind were those 3 soft knocks, the unsettling hiss, and the chilling memory of a long-forgotten map. Isaac's house, when they finally reached it, after a trek across uneven, sun-baked ground, sat tucked into a patch of surprisingly fertile land, surrounded by a leaning wooden fence and the twisted stumps of long-dead trees. Smoke rose gently from the chimney, thin and bluish against the pale sky. The smell of burning mesquite wood drifted through the air, earthy and warm, a stark contrast to the desolation they'd just traversed. Noah, without hesitation, stepped forward and knocked on the weathered door. After a moment, it creaked open, revealing a tall, sinewy man with a patchy gray beard, deep-set, wary eyes, and a guarded expression that seemed permanently etched onto his leathery face. Isaac was a man who'd seen hope rise and fall, like the seasons mostly fall. "My name's Noah," the boy said quickly, his voice surprisingly clear despite his exhaustion. "This is Mr. Grayson. We need help. Urgent help." The man Isaac didn't answer right away. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned Nathaniel from head to toe, lingering on his expensive shoes, now caked with mud and dust. "Another one of the town's wild goose chases." He grunted, his voice raspy. "Or are you lost city man?" Isaac had a reputation for being reclusive, and a past experience involving grifting teenagers trying to extort money with a fabricated emergency. A trapped dog that was actually a cleverly placed speaker had made him doubly suspicious. Years ago. Isaac continued, his eyes narrowing. "I wasted half a day helping some folks look for a missing surveyor out Prentice Way. Turned out he just ran off with the barmaid. Some folks got no shame." Nathaniel stepped forward, extending a hand that Isaac eyed but didn't take. "I'm Nathaniel Grayson. We believe there's a child trapped underground in an old hatch out in the far field. Noah's brother, Eli. He knocked back, but he sounds weak. Very weak." A hatch, a child. Isaac let out a short, dry laugh that held no humor, only skepticism. Lived here nigh on 30 years, son. There's no hatch like that out there sensible folk know of. Just old tales about the abandoned Prentice mine workings place where a couple of greenhorn miners went missing back in the 50s and were never found. Superstition. You two pulling my leg. Noah reached into his pocket and pulled out the photograph, holding it close to his chest, a sacred offering. My brother's down there. Eli, I've heard him. For days. He knocks back. But today, the knocks were so faint. Isaac stared at the boy, his gaze lingering on the photograph, and then flicking over to Nathaniel, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Perhaps a memory of his own long-lost hopes, or the ghost of that unfound calf, a rare victory against the odds. And you believe this, Mr. Grayson, a man like you? Isaac's tone was challenging. Someone with your kind of resources. What brings you to this godforsaken field listening to ghost stories? Nathaniel hesitated, the silence stretching. I can't explain it. He admitted, his voice softer now, tinged with an uncertainty that mirrored Isaac's own. But I heard it. 3 knocks from below, clear as day. Distinct. They came back exactly the same, not an echo. And then, a hiss, like gas or some mechanism. Could be a drainage pipe, loose, compressed air escaping, could be an animal trapped. Kids from town play tricks like that all the time, especially near the old Prentice site. Isaac snapped, his skepticism hardening. And grown men shouldn't be encouraging this kind of dangerous nonsense. That field is unstable in places, full of sinkholes from the old diggings. They say those Prentice tunnels are cursed. I understand your doubts. Nathaniel replied, his voice taking on a new edge of quiet intensity. Believe me, I do. But if there's even a 1% chance someone's really down there, if Noah is right, we might save a life. It won't take long to check properly. We just need more leverage. Maybe a crowbar, some sturdy rope. The hatch isn't just rusted shut. It feels different. Isaac stared at him for a long, uncomfortable time, his eyes boring into Nathaniel's. He saw not a fool but a man, driven by something deep and perhaps broken. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back inside. A minute later, he returned, a heavy crowbar and a shovel slung over his shoulder, along with a coil of thick rope and a sturdy-looking pulley block. He also carried a tarnished WWI-era gas mask. Just in case your hiss means bad air, he grumbled. Let's go. But I'm telling you now, if this is some elaborate hoax, or if you damage what's left of the Prentice folly, I'm calling Sheriff Brody. And he ain't known for his patience with city folks stirring up trouble. Especially trouble on land Victor Lane has his eyes on. No one said a word on the tense walk back across the field. Nathaniel kept a composed face, but his jaw was tight, his grip firm on the shovel Isaac had handed him. Isaac followed behind his back, hunched, weighed down more by a lifetime of doubt than by age, yet there was a grim determination in his stride now. And Noah led the way, a small, silent pharaoh leading them to a hidden tomb, his eyes holding a strange, fierce glow. Not blind hope, but a stubborn, almost terrifying conviction, sharpened by years of solitary searching and disbelief from others. When they reached the spot, Isaac surveyed the hatch and the surrounding ground with a critical eye. This area, it ain't stable, he muttered, prodding the earth with his boot. The Prentice shafts run all under here. This hatch looks like an old access point, probably to a ventilation tunnel, or maybe something Lane cobbled together for reasons best known to himself. If it's not supported right opening, it could trigger a cave-in. He pointed to a complex, heavily rusted locking mechanism integrated into the hatch's rim, almost invisible beneath layers of grime. And that ain't gonna be easy. That's an old Tanner lock, industrial grade. Needs 2 points of simultaneous pressure to release before you can even think about lifting. And see this here. He pointed to a small, almost invisible port next to the lock. That hiss you heard could be a pressure release or worse, some kind of failsafe. Prentice was a paranoid old coot even before Lane bought the rights. Some say he booby-trapped parts of the mine to keep people out. Just as Isaac was explaining the mechanism, a battered pickup truck rumbled into view across the field, bouncing over the uneven terrain, heading directly for them. Lucas Victor Lane's silver-haired, sharp-featured assistant was behind the wheel. He skidded to a halt a few yards away, kicking up a plume of dust, a heavy tire iron in his hand, as he emerged. He wasn't alone. A younger, beefier man climbed out of the passenger side muscles bulging under a tight t-shirt, his expression blank and thuggish. Well, what have we here? Lucas drawled, his eyes cold as river stones fixed on Nathaniel. Mr. Grayson, isn't it fancy meeting you out here? This is private property. Mr. Lane wouldn't want folks trespassing and certainly not disturbing his historical artifacts. His gaze flicked to the hatch, a flicker of something ugly in their depths, and then to the unknown mechanism Isaac had pointed out. That hatch stays closed for safety reasons. The air down there, it's poison. Old mine gases. There's a child trapped down there. Nathaniel said, his voice dangerously calm, stepping in front of Noah. Noah's brother, and we're opening it. Lucas let out a dismissive scoff. A child here, don't be ridiculous. This is an old sealed-off mine entrance, full of nothing but bad air, unstable rock, and snakes. You folks are liable to get yourselves hurt or worse. Best you move along. He took a menacing step closer, the other man flanking him. Mr. Lane explicitly forbids anyone from tampering with these old structures. We heard him. Noah piped up, his voice small but defiant, squeezing past Nathaniel. He knocked back, he's getting weaker. Lucas's lip curled. Kid, you're hearing things. Or maybe the heat's got to you. Now I suggest you all leave, before I have to call Sheriff Brody to escort you for trespassing and property damage. He tapped the tire iron against his thigh. Brody was known to be accommodating to Mr. Lane. We're not leaving until we open this hatch, Nathaniel stated, planting himself firmly. Isaac, after a moment's hesitation, hefted his crowbar, standing beside Nathaniel. The unspoken challenge hung heavy in the air. The thuggish man cracked his knuckles. Lucas's eyes narrowed. He pulled out a phone. Sheriff Lucas Thorne here. Got some trespassers out on the old Prentice lot trying to break into one of Mr. Lane's sealed shafts. Yes, sir. Causing a disturbance, and I think they're about to trigger something dangerous. He hung up, a smug look on his face. He's on his way. You've got maybe 15-20 minutes. And trust me, opening that without knowing how could release a whole lot more than you bargained for. Last person who tried to force a Prentice lock ended up with more than just bad air in his lungs. The urgency ratcheted up. Isaac spat on the ground. Damn him. And damn Lane. All right, Grayson, Noah, here's what we do with this Tanner lock. One crowbar here, one here. Pry upwards and outwards at the same time when I give the word. Noah, stand back. And Grayson, if you feel the ground give way, jump clear. The tunnels under here are like rotten lace. They positioned their tools. The sun beat down mercilessly. Just then, a series of rapid, frantic taps, almost too weak to discern, came from beneath the hatch. Thump, 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 thump. Then silence. Not even a cough. Eli was fading, or something was terribly wrong. Now, Isaac roared. The two men put their full weight into it. The metal screeched a dry, jarring sound like a blade slicing through silence. Red dust and flakes of rust burst into the air, spattering Nathaniel's sleeves. The locking mechanism resisted, groaned, then with a sudden sharp crack, one side gave, then the other. The hatch was unbelievably heavy, as if time itself and perhaps Victor's malevolence had joined forces to keep it shut. "Stop them!" Lucas barked. But before he or his companion could move, Isaac, with surprising agility, swung his crowbar in a warning arc. "Stay back, Thorn, or I'll acquaint your friend here with some prentice geology personal-like." Lucas and his man hesitated, wary of the old farmer's desperate resolve. Nathaniel and Isaac paused to catch their breath, their muscles screaming, then leveraged the crowbars to begin lifting. Nathaniel's wrists began to tremble, but he didn't stop. Lucas watched his face, a mask of fury, and a dawning, terrified comprehension of how badly this was about to unravel for everyone involved, including himself. He made no further move to physically intervene now that the lock was broken, perhaps wary of Isaac's formidable presence and the potential for a real fight. Suddenly, a sleek black sedan, identical to Nathaniel's, roared across the field, skidding to a halt beside Lucas's truck. Victor Lane himself stepped out, his face a mask of cold fury. "Grayson, what in God's name do you think you're doing on my property, destroying my assets?" He was holding a small, expensive-looking case. "I warned you people about this land. It's dangerous." "There's a child in there, Lane," Nathaniel bit out, straining at the hatch. "Nonsense." Victor snapped, his eyes glinting. "You always were a bleeding heart, Grayson, meddling where you weren't wanted. Remember our little chat about the Prentice development all those years ago? You should have taken my offer then. Perhaps if you had, you wouldn't be grubbing in the dirt like a common laborer and Sylvia." Nathaniel flinched as if struck. "Don't you dare speak her name." The grief and rage momentarily fueled him, and with a renewed effort the hatch groaned louder. "This is your last chance, Grayson." Victor's voice was laced with venom. He gestured to Lucas's thug. "Stop him. That hatch is rigged. It's for my protection." But it was too late. With a heavy, protracted groan, the lid cracked open at one corner. A gust of cold, foul air burst out, thick, damp, carrying the unmistakable, stomach-turning scent of decay, human waste, and something acrid chemical. Isaac stumbled back, coughing quickly, strapping on the gas mask. Bad air, real bad. Victor Lane's face went pale. "You fools, you've triggered it." Nathaniel, ignoring Victor, peered down, his heart hammering. For a fleeting second, the thought of Sylvia, lost and alone, merged with the unknown fate of the child below. But Noah didn't hesitate. He crouched, a small, cheap flashlight in his shaking hand, and aimed its weak beam into the oppressive blackness, trying to ignore the faint, acrid smell. A faint breath, a soft, struggling exhale rose through the musty air, fragile enough to be mistaken for nothing but the wind. Then from the edge of the encroaching shadow, a dry, dust-covered hand, scraped raw and trembling, reached up, its fingers clutching weakly at the rim of the hatch. Its fingernails were broken, caked with dirt and blood. The motion was feeble, barely more than a whisper of movement. Isaac, peering through his mask, stood frozen, his face slackened, eyes wide with a dawning horror. "Dear God." He muttered the words, barely audible, his earlier skepticism utterly annihilated. Victor stared momentarily, speechless, then his eyes narrowed. "Get him out of there, Lucas, and make sure he doesn't say a word." At the bottom of the dark, narrow space, perhaps an old maintenance pit or a forgotten cellar, lay a child, or what was left of one. So thin the skin clung to his bones like parchment clothes, in tatters, hair matted with sweat and filth. The skin was pale ashen, dusted with a layer of gray, like cold soot from a long-dead fire. It was no longer the body of childhood, but something worn down, starved and forgotten by the world above. Around his neck was a thin, tarnished chain, and tucked into the waistband of his tattered trousers was a small metallic object that glinted dully in Noah's flashlight beam. A small USB drive. Eli seemed to clutch it protectively, even in his weakened state. Those eyes, lost and wild in the sudden intrusion of light, scanned the opening, then locked on the beam of Noah's flashlight. When Eli saw Noah's face silhouetted against the bright sky, a tiny, almost imperceptible flicker sparked in his dull gaze. So small it could have gone unnoticed, unless you'd been waiting 2 desperate years to see it. Noah didn't scream. He didn't cry out. But when Eli's hand, frail as a dying bird's, touched his, the tears came. Hot, quiet, unstoppable. He bit his lip, trying not to sob aloud to stay strong for his brother. "I'm here, Eli." Noah whispered not a statement, but a song, a quiet tune hummed just for Eli, for himself, and for the impossible journey no one but him had ever truly believed in. His voice was softer than the sighing wind, yet it carried the strength of mountains. Eli strained upward, a clumsy, uncoordinated motion, like someone who had forgotten how to use their limbs after long disuse. He gripped his brother's hand with surprising strength and let out a broken, rasping sob. The first sound he had made in what felt like an eternity. Not a cry of pain, but of agonizing, overwhelming release. His other hand fumbled at his waistband, touching the USB drive. Nathaniel was frozen in place. He hardly dared to breathe. The lump in his throat rose not just from shock, but from a profound, slow-burning regret he hadn't known the depths of until this very moment. He'd doubted this boy. He'd nearly driven off. The sight of the USB drive stirred another unwelcome memory. Victor Lane, years ago, boasting about digitizing certain sensitive Prentice mine records, keeping them off the books, but secure. Had Lane used this child? The thought was monstrous. The sorrow didn't weaken him. It humbled him, stripping away layers of cynicism. In his mind, Sylvia's face surfaced, that same frightened, lost look from a childhood illness. A quiet crack ran through Nathaniel's chest, not from pain this time, but from something deeper, sharper shame and a burning, righteous anger. Isaac sank to his knees, not from exhaustion, but because his legs could no longer support the weight of what he was witnessing. "We've got to get him out," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Careful now. That air, it ain't right." Victor Lane looked flustered. "Lucas, the case, get the boy, and the item now." Nathaniel nodded, his own voice low and rough, like stone scraped across stone. "Careful, don't hurt him." He knelt, peering into the dimness, assessing. He carefully slid his arms under Eli's emaciated frame. The boy was terrifyingly weightless, barely there yet. Nathaniel's hands shook as he lifted him gently from the hatch. As he did, the USB drive slipped from Eli's waistband. Lucas lunged for it, but Noah, quick as a whip, snatched it up. The torn, filthy shirt revealed a constellation of bruises across the skeletal shoulders and down the back. Some faded and yellowed, some newer, an angry purple, some dried, some oozing. Isaac saw them and covered his mouth, a choked sound escaping him. He'd seen hardship, but he'd never seen starvation and abuse like this, not up close. Eli clung to Nathaniel's hand as he was lifted, then turned his head weakly and reached for Noah, their fingers locking. Neither let go. Noah deftly tucked the USB drive into his own pocket. Victor's eyes blazed at Noah, then at Lucas. "You incompetent fool." When Nathaniel looked back at Noah, he was stunned anew. The boy's legs were streaked with cuts and scratches, dried blood caked along them. His shirt was torn in several places, his back sun-blistered. "How far did you walk, Noah?" Nathaniel asked quietly, his voice filled with a dawning respect that bordered on awe. "From the old town." Noah rasped his gaze, never leaving Eli. "Every day a little farther. Looking." Isaac gasped. That's over 30 miles through rough country, kid, you. He trailed off, shaking his head. We've got to get to a hospital. Now. The distant wail of a siren grew louder. Sheriff Brody was indeed on his way. Victor Lane straightened. Sheriff Brody will handle this. This is a private matter, a family disciplining issue that got out of hand. Grayson, you will regret interfering. He glanced at the small case he carried, then seemed to decide against opening it. Lucas, let's go. We'll meet Brody. He shot one last venomous look at Nathaniel and Noah. That flash drive contains proprietary information. I expect it returned. Get in the car. Nathaniel said, no room for argument in his voice. Isaac helped me with him. We'll meet the sheriff on the road or at the hospital. Lucas and Mr. Lane can explain themselves to more than just Brody. Lucas Thorne merely sneered, but there was a new unease in his eyes as he watched them carry the barely conscious child toward Nathaniel's car. Victor Lane radiated controlled fury. The car roared down the dusty track, then onto the paved road, racing toward civilization. In the back seat, Eli lay in Noah's lap, his fingers still clutched around the old photograph. Two children holding each other, wrinkled but symbolically whole. His eyes were nearly closed, but at the corner of his mouth, a tiny, almost imperceptible smile. The sky turned a bruised violet as the sun disappeared behind the fields, and for the first time in 2 long, dark years, light, real, warm, life-giving light, fell on that stolen boy. Not just any light, but a light that promised to touch parts of the world everyone, even Eli himself, thought had long since rotted away. Noah felt the small, hard rectangle of the USB drive in his pocket, a cold secret weighing against his thigh. At the city hospital, the afternoon faded like any other, with the sterile clack of hurried heels on linoleum, the rhythmic roll of gurney wheels, and rushed, hushed footsteps echoing down long, impersonal hallways. Everything moved with the practiced, detached flow of a familiar soundtrack. But inside the small private room where Eli lay, time seemed to have come to a halt, held in place by a pain too deep for words. A trauma that clung to him like the stench of the pit he'd escaped. Eli startled at the clanging sound of a dropped bedpan, his eyes flying open in terror, a small whimper escaping his lips. Eli curled up on his side, his back to the room, eyes shut tight against the unfamiliar brightness, the relentless sounds. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't speak, didn't react to the quiet murmurs around him, except to flinch or cower. Each time Nurse Emily, a woman with kind eyes and gentle hands, reached to change his bandages or check his vitals, he flinched as if bracing for an invisible blow, his gaze darting to any metallic object in the room. The sight of IV poles or metal trays seemed to heighten his anxiety. Emily never asked questions, sensing the fragility of the boy's psyche. She simply cleaned and dressed the wounds, pressing a gentle hand to his forehead, like a wordless promise of comfort. His body bore layers of bruises and cuts, some deep and infected, carefully bandaged, now others older, faded scars that told a silent, horrifying story. Noah sat beside the bed, his gaze fixed on his brother's still form. He still wore the same blood and dirt-stained clothes from the field, a testament to his ordeal. His own legs were blistered and raw, his hands scraped from the long journey and the desperate effort to open the hatch. But he didn't seem to notice his own discomfort. Every shallow breath Eli took drew Noah closer, as if looking away, even for a moment, might mean losing him all over again to the darkness. He'd slipped the USB drive to Nathaniel before they entered the hospital, whispering, "Uncle Victor really wants this. Be careful." Nathaniel Grayson stood in the doorway, a silent sentinel keeping his distance, yet profoundly connected. He watched the brothers in silence, his heart clenched with a vicarious agony at the thought of Eli trapped in that dark, fetid pit for 2 whole years. 2 years of terror, of hunger, of lost hope. He saw Noah gripping his brother's hand. with quiet, fierce resolve. His own small face pale from exhaustion and lack of food, but his eyes unwavering. The USB drive felt heavy in his own pocket. He'd had his tech team discreetly copy its contents, damning financial records of Victor Lane's shell corporations, illegal land acquisitions tied to the Prentice mine, and most chillingly, what appeared to be blackmail material on several local officials. Victor wasn't just abusive. He was a puppet master. "You holding up okay, Noah?" Nathaniel asked softly, his voice carefully modulated. Noah looked up, his eyes wells of fatigue. "I'm okay. But Eli, he keeps whispering about the dark secret, and don't tell." Nathaniel nodded, his voice firm, a promise. "We'll do everything we can to help Eli recover. Everything. And we'll make sure all the secrets come out, Noah. Safely." At that moment, Nurse Selena, a supervising nurse, stepped into the room to review the new admission. She glanced at the chart, her eyes widening slightly at the name Eli Torres. She froze. "Is that really Eli Torres?" she asked, her voice shaking, a strange expression on her face. Noah nodded, his gaze returning to his brother. "Yes, his name is Eli Torres." Selena pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen as she quickly typed a message to her sister. "Maria, get to Mercy General right away. You won't believe this. Eli Torres is here. He's alive." Less than an hour later, Maria Torres, a woman whose face showed both the weariness of a long fight and the sudden sharp resurgence of hope, arrived. Rain still clung to her coat as she knocked gently on the door. When she stepped in, her eyes, red-rimmed but intense, fell first on Noah. "Miss Maria." Noah whispered, a flicker of recognition and relief in his voice. Maria rushed forward, her hand, instinctively brushing his matted hair back from his forehead, then turned to the still form on the bed. Her breath caught audibly at the sight of the raw, chafed bruises lining Eli's thin neck. "It's really you two." She choked out, tears welling. Memories of unheeded warnings to child services of her own, ignored reports to school authorities, of unanswered pleas to indifferent officials, came rushing back with bitter clarity. She recalled Victor Lane's smooth denials, his thinly veiled threats about her overzealousness, potentially impacting her teaching position. Nathaniel stepped forward. "I'm Nathaniel Grayson. I helped bring them here." Maria turned to him, her gaze searching. "I'm Maria Torres, their former teacher, and a friend of their late mother." She extended a hand. "Thank you, Mr. Grayson. Thank you. Without you..." Her voice trailed off, overwhelmed. "I heard rumors you were in the area. Something about old business." Nathaniel met her gaze. "Something like that, Miss Torres. It seems Mr. Lane has a talent for creating unfinished business." Nathaniel knelt down beside Noah. "Noah," he said gently, "is there anything you want to tell me about what happened to Eli, how he ended up there? Did Victor ever talk about why he was so interested in that old minefield?" Noah hesitated, his eyes darting to Eli. "I asked about my brother," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "They told me to mind my own business, that Eli was gone, sent away. But I didn't believe them." "Who, Noah? Who told you that, Ma?" "Victor Lane." Noah said the name, falling like a stone into the quiet room. My uncle, our mother's brother. After Mama died, he split us up. Said Eli went away to a special school far away. But I knew that wasn't true. Eli wouldn't leave without telling me." Noah's voice dropped, laden with a pain too heavy for his years. "At first, after Mama, we still shared a room. But a few weeks later, Uncle Victor had someone take Eli away, in the middle of the night. No warning. That morning, I woke up. Eli's bed was empty. He said Eli had to go somewhere more suitable for his condition. Then he packed up all of Eli's things like he'd never even lived there, like he wanted to erase him. A single tear traced a path through the grime on Noah's cheek. Once I heard Uncle Victor yelling at Eli something about keeping the prentice secret safe, and that Eli was the only one small enough to retrieve it if something went wrong. I didn't understand then. Maria interrupted, her voice trembling with a mixture of sorrow and anger. Victor, he had ties to local officials, Mr. Grayson. Significant influence. After the boy's mother died from her illness, he filed for guardianship. The state benefits the disability support for Eli. They kept coming. But only Victor received them. Eli never saw a doctor, never got the therapy he was supposed to. She wrung her hands. I reported my suspicions 3 times. Formal reports. With photographs Noah managed to smuggle to me before Eli disappeared. Never got a single response. I was even threatened with reassignment by the district superintendent, told to focus on my teaching and not meddle. The Prentice mine speculation has always been around him. Rumors of hidden dealings of people who crossed him and disappeared. Nathaniel's hands tightened into fists, his knuckles white. He looked over at Eli, still unmoving, a tiny broken bird. The contents of the USB drive burned in his mind. Miss Maria, he said, his voice dangerously soft. I need those reports. Any records you have? Anything. And that USB drive Noah found? It confirms much more than child abuse. I have them, she said firmly, her eyes flashing. Copies. Hidden. I'll bring everything. A new thought struck Nathaniel as he looked at the squalor of the field, the derelict hatch, the mention of Prentice. This wasn't just about child abuse. Victor was clearly capable of far more, deeply entangled in criminal enterprises that made him feel untouchable. The old business dealings, ethical lines his own company had refused to cross in this very region. Refusing a lucrative partnership with Lane to develop on the unstable Prentice land using experimental and ethically dubious geostabilization tech. Now snapped into sharp, ugly focus. Victor Lane had tried to silence him then with veiled threats. Now those threats felt chillingly current. Nathaniel stood, a cold resolve settling over him. I'll be back. But first, there's somewhere I need to go. Where? Maria asked, a hint of trepidation in her voice. To visit my daughter's grave, he said, his voice rough with unshed tears. She once asked me, Daddy, if I disappeared, would you come find me? I told her I'd search the ends of the earth. He paused, his gaze distant and filled with pain. After that, he added, his voice hardening, I'm going to the police. The state police, not the local ones. And then I'm going to find a lawyer who isn't afraid to fight a man who thinks he owns the world. He also knew he needed to contact his old security chief. The USB drive's contents were explosive. Noah watched him go, a giant of a man, who was the first adult to truly see him, to believe him. For the first time in 2 long, dark years, someone believed. Outside, the rain still fell, a steady, cleansing drizzle. But inside that sterile hospital room, a small, fragile light had been kindled. The light of hope, and the faintest, flickering promise of a new beginning, even as new dangers gathered. I heard the boy's still alive. Eli Torres, been locked up right here in this town, can you believe it? On Prentice land of all places. A woman whispered over the bakery counter the next morning, her voice a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. They say there was more down there than just the boy. Something Victor Lane didn't want found. No way, Victor Lane. But that man still donates thousands to the church rebuilding fund. Another replied, her eyes wide with both doubt and a nascent fear. Prentice land. Isn't that where those old miners vanished, and that businessman who opposed Lane's development plan years ago met with that accident? The morning after a heavy night of rain, the small, tight-knit town still lay under a blanket of cold, suffocating gray mist. Puddles reflecting the bruised sky lingered in the narrow, cracked streets. A heavy gloom settled over everything, as though the very sky was carrying the weight of a secret brutally uncovered. The news, initially whispers from hospital staff, had spread like wildfire. Eli Torres, the boy who had vanished without a trace 2 years ago, had been found alive, starved, and broken in a subterranean pit on land owned by Victor Lane. People spoke in hushed tones, afraid to voice their thoughts too loudly. But the stir was unmistakable. In every stolen glance, every quick look cast over a shoulder, the unspoken question hung heavy. How could this happen here? In this town, the name Victor Lane, benefactor and community pillar, had never been seriously questioned. Until now. Tales of the Prentice mine's dark history of fortunes, made and lives lost, began to resurface intertwined with Lane's name. But Nathaniel Grayson was different. He was an outsider, unbound by the town's intricate web of loyalties and fears, yet now personally entangled by Victor's past malice. After a sleepless, tormented night, spent partly at the hospital watching over Eli and Noah, and partly pacing his anonymous hotel room, strategizing with his lawyer and his ex-head of security, via encrypted calls, he had made a decision. No more evasions. No more polite silences. In his hands now was a thick file, a damning collection of documents handed to him by Maria Torres, supplemented by the explosive contents of the USB drive and his own company's archived records of Lane's previous shady proposal. Inside were all the things that had once been deliberately ignored, buried under layers of bureaucratic indifference and fear. Maria's meticulously documented reports of suspected abuse. Noah's smuggled photographs of Eli's injuries, sparse medical records hinting at his developmental delays, and a newly acquired, chillingly concise, written account from a delivery man who 2 years prior claimed to have heard muffled screaming from Victor Lane's heavily fenced back property. And now, copies of financial trails, blackmail notes, and evidence of land fraud connected to the Prentice holdings. One file Maria had discovered was chillingly mislabeled. Grant applications, Victor Lane Community Enrichment Foundation. Nathaniel tightened his grip on the envelope, carefully tucking it into the inner pocket of his coat. His eyes, which for 2 years had held the blurry sorrow of a grieving father, lost in an endless drive, now burned with a cold, sharp, determined light. He knew Victor Lane would retaliate. He knew the system in this town had been quiet complicit for far too long. And he knew the truth, however painful, however ugly, might not be a welcome guest. He was also aware that by exposing Lane, he was exposing himself to Lane's reach, the reach that had already touched him with veiled threats years ago, and via those anonymous letters. The local newspaper office, the Oak Haven Chronicle, sat off a sleepy side street. When Nathaniel stepped through the door, the bell above it jingling forlornly. Mr. Maxwell, the editor-in-chief, sat hunched behind a cluttered wooden desk. The middle-aged man hesitated when he saw Nathaniel walk in, his expression immediately guarded. "Mr. Grayson," Maxwell began, his tone polite but distinctly cautious. "I've heard some things, rumors, but you understand the press needs verification, concrete facts." Nathaniel placed the thick file firmly on the desk. "I didn't come here to listen to excuses, Mr. Maxwell." He said, his voice low and even, but with an undercurrent of steel. "I came here to show you what concrete facts look like when a town chooses to be blind. This isn't just about a child. It's about a rot that goes deep. It's about the Prentice legacy Victor Lane has built his fortune on." He pushed the file forward. "Sarkar, how many bruises? How many days of starvation, how many screams in the night does it take for you to believe a child was locked in a hellhole for 2 years while his uncle cashed benefit checks and built an empire on lies? Stardier. Maxwell reluctantly opened the file. His eyes scanned the documents, lingering on the stark photographs, the financial trails, the chilling implications of the Prentice connection. He swallowed hard, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of many compromises, he shook his head and pushed the file back. "Mr. Grayson, this is disturbing. Deeply. But without an official investigation underway, without a statement from the DA's office, we can't publish this. You understand, don't you? We're a small paper. Victor Lane. He has deep roots, powerful friends. He practically owns this town. He could sue us into oblivion or worse. There are stories about people who crossed him regarding Prentice." "You mean you're afraid?" Nathaniel's voice was flat, devoid of accusation, yet heavy with contempt. "Or are you part of his deep roots?" "I mean, I'm cautious," Maxwell countered, but his gaze wouldn't meet Nathaniel's. "Prudent. I have a family, Mr. Grayson. A business. There are lines one doesn't cross in Oakhaven if one wants to survive." Nathaniel nodded slowly, a cold, bitter ache spreading in his chest. "A child was buried alive, Mr. Maxwell. Other crimes have been buried with him, and all you're worried about is protecting your advertisers and avoiding a lawsuit." He stood towering over the editor. He said nothing more, the silence thick with unspoken condemnation, and walked out. On the way back to his car, he called Maria. "The local paper won't touch it, Maria. Too scared or bought. We need a bigger platform, someone who isn't tied down by local politics and Victor Lane's charity checks." "I know someone," Maria said after a pause. "A young woman, Chloe Jensen. She used to intern at the Chronicle, but she left. Too principled for Maxwell, I think. Said he killed a story of hers about irregularities in county land sales, ones connected to Prentice. She freelances now, has a bit of a reputation for tackling tough stories, the kind that get people threatened. I'll reach out to her. Her own brother disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Years ago, a cold case everyone said was an accident. But she always suspected foul play tied to local corruption." Meanwhile, at the hospital, Noah sat quietly at Eli's bedside. Though Eli was now receiving intravenous fluids, he still hadn't spoken a word or willingly opened his eyes. Now and then, a tremor would run through his frail body, and he would flinch violently if a doctor or nurse came too near unexpectedly, especially if they clanged a metal instrument or if the lights were too bright. Noah hadn't left his brother's side. Linda, a young, earnest social worker assigned to the case, arrived. When she heard Maria Torres carefully describe Noah's incredible search and listened to Noah himself share fragmented, painful pieces of their past, her face went pale. "You're saying your Uncle Victor systematically separated you two, lied to everyone, and then essentially abandoned you, Noah?" Linda asked, her pen flying across her notepad. Noah nodded, his gaze fixed on Eli's still face. He made Eli go down into the dark place sometimes, to get things, before he locked him there for good. Eli was scared of it, said it had bad memories. Linda was quiet for a moment. She remembered seeing Victor Lane's name in the system once years ago, flagged for something minor that was quickly dismissed. But he was generally listed as a model guardian. Now everything was horrifyingly different. "Maybe," she whispered almost to herself, "the old physical records. They weren't always meticulously deleted when the system went digital, especially from rural counties. Maybe something was missed, overlooked from the original Prentice mine investigations, something Lane thought was buried." That very afternoon, armed with a specific time frame and Eli's full name, she and Maria drove to the sprawling, antiquated county records center. In a dusty, dimly lit basement, they sifted through layers of dust. "Here it is," Maria breathed, pulling out a thin, fragile file. "Elmwood Elementary. Student Torres Eli. Suspected abuse or neglect. Teacher report M. Torres." Clipped to it the photo of Eli's bruised arm and Mr. Arbuckle's statement about screaming. A separate, thicker file nearby was ominously titled "Prentice Mine, Closed Investigations Supplemental." Linda felt a chill. This was bigger than even she had imagined. "They didn't disappear, Maria." Linda said, her voice flat. "They were buried. Under indifference, under influence, under money." The rain had finally let up by evening, but the air still carried the heavy, damp gloom. A chilly breeze drifted through, bringing the incongruous, gentle scent of wax candles from St. Michael's Church Hall, where a hastily repurposed winter charity fundraiser for orphans and children in need was taking place. Victor Lane stood at the podium, exuding calm benevolence. He spoke with practiced sincerity of responsibility, compassion. Below in the sparsely filled hall, some townsfolk nodded, caught in his long-cultivated image. At the back of the hall, Chloe Jensen, the journalist, watched. His face wore a convincing mask, but his eyes, Chloe noted, were hollow distant. She discreetly took photos. Beside her, Maria Torres stared at an old classroom photo. The space beside Noah was empty. Eli had been absent. A deep unease stirred in Chloe. She'd heard whispers of a missing child, persistent rumors of Victor's ruthlessness concerning the Prentice acquisition stories that never quite died. Now, Victor's cloyingly performative speech set against the fresh, horrific news heightened her suspicions. That very afternoon, Nathaniel Grayson had driven to Victor Lane's imposing estate. It wasn't Victor who came to the intimidating wrought iron gate. It was Lucas Thorne. His expression was icy, his voice dry. Lucas, it turned out, was not just an assistant. He was the step-uncle of the two boys, his sister having been Victor's late, much younger wife. A woman who had died under somewhat cloudy circumstances herself a few years back. Rumors said she knew too much about the Prentice dealings. "What do you want?" Lucas asked, his eyes, unblinking, his tone probing and hostile. Nathaniel replied firmly. "I want to talk to Victor Lane. I want to talk about Eli. And I want to talk about what was in that basement and the USB drive Noah found." Lucas didn't budge. "There's no Eli here of concern to you, and that drive is Mr. Lane's private property. That story ends now, for everyone's sake." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. "And if I don't stop," Nathaniel's voice sharpened, "if I don't let this story end, if I talk about what was really on that drive, Lucas, about Prentice." Lucas stared directly into the camera. A flicker of genuine menace and fear lit up his eyes. "Then don't be surprised if someone, or something you care about, gets hurt. Accidents happen all the time, Mr. Grayson, especially to people who poke their noses into decades of Prentice history. Your daughter Sylvia, tragic. Be a shame if history repeated itself with these boys." The gate began to close. Nathaniel's blood ran cold. The mention of Sylvia so callously was a direct threat. He immediately contacted his security consultant. Chloe Jensen returned to her small apartment. Fueled by coffee and moral outrage, she pieced together the old rumors, Victor's speech, and the clues Maria provided about ignored reports and stonewalling, plus what Nathaniel had discreetly fed her about the USB drive's contents related to Prentice. She typed furiously. Maxwell at the Oakhaven Chronicle refused it again. "Chloe, Victor Lane is a major donor. Without prosecutable evidence, official charges, we can't run this. It's too risky. He'll bury us. He buried people over Prentice before. Chloe, disheartened but not defeated, opened her anonymous blog, The Unseen Truth. She poured everything into the post, including a damning photo of Victor. She attached every verifiable detail about Eli Noah, the suppressed reports, and alluded to the Prentice mine's dark connections to Lane's fortune, hinting at evidence held on a recovered flash drive. She hit publish. Within hours, the boy in the basement, a small town's buried shame and bloody fortune, began making waves. Hashtags, Justice for Eli, Victor Lane exposed, Prentice secrets exploded. Linda, the social worker, received anonymous blocked calls. Keep your mouth shut. Prentice secrets stay buried. A dark sedan parked across from her building. Maria Torres found an unmarked envelope. Stop digging or the kids won't stay safe. Accidents happen, like they did at Prentice. Victor Lane, feeling the pressure, lashed out at Lucas Thorne. You didn't do your damn job. You let them dig around you, let this explode, you lost the drive. He fired Lucas on the spot. Lucas, discarded and terrified, knew Victor would make him the scapegoat for Eli and whatever the drive revealed. His only leverage was a single grainy audio recording, kept for just such a betrayal. He used a burner phone to call Maria Torres. His voice was hoarse. Miss Torres, this is Lucas Thorne. I have something about Eli and about Victor's direct orders concerning the Prentice access. It implicates Victor directly. Maria, at the hospital with Nathaniel and Noah, listened, her expression grave. They agreed to meet Lucas at a noisy coffee shop. Lucas shaken-handed Maria an old digital voice recorder. She pressed play. A crackle. Then Victor Lane's voice. He doesn't step foot outside that cellar. Got it? No light, no visitors. He's my insurance policy for the Prentice files if they're ever needed. One word of this to anyone, and I cut off all funding to your sister's projects. And you can forget about that little gambling debt I covered for you. Shut your mouth, Lucas, and make sure the boy shuts his. And if that Grayson comes sniffing around Prentice again, remind him what happened to the last person who got too curious. The recording ended. At the same time, fueled by Chloe's blog, former students from Elmwood began speaking out. A collaborative video spread recounting Eli's disappearance and the fears surrounding Lane. Missed me now. Lester, a retired post office worker, found an old unstamped letter. I'm Eli. Please help me. Trapped. Dark. Uncle Victor. Prentice secrets. He'd found it near Lane's estate 2 years ago, thought it a prank, but kept it. Principal Halvers reluctantly checked archived records. Eli Torres' name, a red line through it. No transfer forms. Cornered Halvers admitted Victor Lane had generously offered funding with the understanding that certain discretions regarding troublesome students and Prentice land inquiries would be appreciated. Victor Lane's web of lies was unraveling. An independent investigative team dispatched from the state capitol bypassing local police had been formed. That night, Victor Lane was arrested at his mansion while dining alone. Mr. Victor Lane, you are under arrest on charges related to aggravated child abuse, unlawful imprisonment, egregious financial fraud, obstruction of justice, and multiple RICO Act violations connected to the Prentice mine holdings. Victor stood motionless. I'm afraid there must be some terrible mistake. I'll be calling my attorney. You'll have that right at the station, sir. In the back of the unmarked car, hands cuffed, Victor's composure crumbled. He knew his threats about Nathaniel's past, about Sylvia, would now be seen as further proof of his malice. The Prentice secrets were out. The leaked news of Victor Lane's arrest sent shockwaves. In the courtroom days later, Victor appeared in a dark suit, a mask of offended dignity. His high-powered defense attorney began, "Ladies and gentlemen, no one here directly saw my client commit any abuse. Most of these documents are copies, hearsay, emotional claims. The Prentice Mine allegations are decades-old rumors irrelevant to this case. We are dealing with speculation. The prosecutor, Sarah Chen, stood up. First, Lucas Thorne's audio recording. Victor Lane's cold, menacing voice filled the stunned silence. Victor lowered his head, a muscle twitching in his cheek. Next, Doris Gable, the corn farm owner, trembling, confessed, "I was afraid of him, of Mr. Lane. He owned the mortgage. He told me to keep quiet about anyone near that hatch, especially if they mentioned Prentice, to say it was dangerous." A text message was displayed. "Got the $3,000. Consider it done. Don't ask about the kid or Prentice again. Bank statements, every unexplained withdrawal, lavish purchase. Not a cent from Eli's disability fund had gone to his care. Thousands embezzled, siphoned into shell corporations, many linked to obscured Prentice land deeds. The USB drive's contents were methodically presented, detailing financial crimes and blackmail connected to the mine. Nathaniel Grayson took the stand. "You didn't just lock up a child, Mr. Lane," he said, looking directly at Victor, who refused his gaze. "You locked away his trust, his childhood. You tried to blackmail me years ago over Prentice, and you threatened me again through your man Lucas, even invoking my dead daughter Sylvia to protect your vile secrets. That's the kind of man you are." Silence. Linda, the social worker, her voice trembling, admitted, "I received an informal complaint. I passed it on. My superior said, 'Be discreet. Mr. Victor Lane is respected.' They also mentioned his influence regarding Prentice development approvals. I let it drop." Lucas Thorne was the final devastating witness. He told it all: Victor's plan. Noah abandoned Eli locked in the cellar, an extension of Prentice workings. Eli was small enough to be forced into tight Prentice access tunnels to retrieve items Victor had hidden there. Whenever the boy cried or refused to go into the dark Prentice tunnels, Victor would instruct me to discipline him. "Keep him quiet. He's my Prentice insurance," he'd say. "I did it." Lucas confessed, his voice breaking. "I was scared." Sobs broke out. Victor's attorney remained silent. He knew. It was over. The Prentice curse had finally claimed Victor Lane. Outside crowds stood still, awakening shame resolve. Victor Lane's castle had collapsed. Nathaniel gazed out towards the hospital. He whispered Sylvia's words, "We can't change the past, but we can try to fix the future." "The boy," he smiled. Just a little, but he smiled. Nurse Emily's voice startled Nathaniel. Eli, still thin, fragile, had a faint curve at his mouth as Noah whispered to him. The first genuine smile. It didn't last. Late that morning, Eli was seized by a violent convulsion. His body trembled back, arching foam at his mouth. Alarms shrieked. Emily hit the emergency button. Doctors rushed in. Nathaniel grabbed Noah, shielding him. "What's happening?" Noah screamed, panic overtaking him. Emily, applying an oxygen mask, said, "Stabilizing him. Severe infection, meningitis, or neurological damage from confinement. We need scans, ICU immediately." Noah collapsed, a keening sound of despair. Nathaniel rested a hand on his shoulder. Eli was in ICU for hours. Noah sat outside, rigid, pale. Just before dawn, a doctor emerged. "He's past the worst for now. Seizure controlled. Still unconscious, precarious. The next 48 hours are critical." He paused. "The miracle is his heart. Despite everything, it's remarkably strong. That boy wants to live." Noah broke down, tears of terror and relief. The thread held. The hospital doors swung open days later. Nathaniel entered, followed by Ms. Chen and Attorney Daniels, a victim's rights advocate. Noah looked up. "Well, what happened, sir?" Nathaniel knelt. "Noah Victor Lane, convicted. All counts, including the RICO charges for the Prentice dealings. Life in prison." Noah stared, tears of relief. He turned to Eli, still motionless, living proof. "He's going to pay," Daniels added. "Civil suit against his estate. Assets into a trust for you and Eli. All evidence, Lucas's testimony, financial records from the Prentice fraud, medical reports, Lester's letters, exposed. Investigations into complicit officials are ongoing." Noah bowed his head, trembling. Relief, anger, grief. Nathaniel placed a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't give up, Noah. You found your brother. You brought truth to light." A few days later, Eli moved out of ICU, slowly improving. Maria took Noah to a library. Eli, though unresponsive, was stable. Noah read "The Little Engine That Could." His mother's voice a memory in its verses. He believed his voice would reach Eli. Other children listened. A librarian placed milk and a cookie by Noah. He smiled shyly. A new fragile life began. The hospital clock chimed. Weeks later, Eli was discharged. Still thin, haunted by shadows, prone to terror, especially in dark or confined spaces, or at the sound of metal clanging. But alive, speaking in hesitant whispers. Noah smiled faintly, freely. They weren't going to a shelter. Nathaniel was bringing them home. "This is my home," Nathaniel said, his voice thick with emotion, as the gate of his secluded, tree-lined property opened. A comfortable wooden house nestled amongst pines, filled with warmth. "And I don't want it to stay empty any longer." He led them through sun-dappled rooms, a yellow bedroom with 2 new beds, Noah's drawings pinned up. Sylvia's restored green bicycle, a bookshelf with her treasured comics. He shared Sylvia's spirit, every detail a step toward healing for all of them. That evening, their first dinner. Noah ate quietly. Eli ate a small portion without flinching. Nathaniel placed a file folder on the table. "Tomorrow, family court. I've filed for legal guardianship to adopt. But only if you agree. This is your home if you want it." No grand promises, just a heartfelt offer. Noah looked at Eli, whose eyes held a flicker of trust. Both boys nodded. A family formed. The next day after the paperwork, Nathaniel took them to a lakeside park, Sylvia's old journal in hand. "Sylvia, my only child," he said slowly, bright, smiling, stubborn. He shared stories of their walks, her clumsy poems. "She asked Daddy if I ever got lost, would you come find me?" I laughed. He paused, a tear tracing his cheek. "After a bitter argument, she ran away. Just for hours. Then, the accident." He closed the journal. Her last letter unfinished. "Did you ever come looking for me, Dad? Did you even try?" "It's haunted me." He looked at Eli and Noah, listening intently. "Then I met you, Noah. Out there, I saw Sylvia's fierce spirit, her refusal to give up. I knew I couldn't make the same mistake twice. I couldn't walk away again. Victor Lane tried to use my past, my pain over Sylvia to stop me. But he only made me more determined." Noah took the pen Nathaniel offered and opened a new notebook. "We were not abandoned. We were found." He wrote, "Mom, if you can read this. Eli is alive. 2 years alone in the dark. But not anymore. I found him. Just like you said, never leave each other behind." We kept that promise. He stopped, shaky breath. Eli slept peacefully nearby. I was so scared no one would believe me. Scared I'd never see Eli again. But if I stayed quiet, he really would have disappeared. Tears smudged the ink. We still have each other, and now we have Mr. Nathaniel. He didn't run away. He stayed. I think you would have liked him, Mom. And finally, we have a family now. Not a replacement, but a place to begin again. A safe place. Mom, I think I've found home." Noah closed the notebook, placed it by Eli. He took his brother's hand. Eli's stirred lips moving. The next morning, Eli read Noah's first page. He looked at Noah, then at Nathaniel, and nodded. No words needed. After 2 long, dark, silent years, Eli Torres was beginning to truly live. In Oak Haven's town square weeks later, a solemn ceremony of remembrance and rededication. Fragile, hard-won hope. Hammers echoed the scent of cut wood for a new notice board. Children's laughter. Chalk drawings, suns, flowers, figures holding hands. A newly crafted wooden sign. No child should ever have to knock on the door of despair again. Oak Haven remembers. Oak Haven protects. The sins of Prentice are buried. Not just a slogan, a vow. People placed cherished items into a wooden chest. What remains of memory, what builds our future? Mrs. Doris Gable arrived, placing a white envelope. I know I was wrong. I was a coward. I hope the children and God can forgive me. No one judged. Forgiveness for some blooming. Mr. Halver's retired principal at the microphone. Not all of us deserve forgiveness, but I promise this: every child in this town will have a name that is heard, a classroom that is safe, and a door that is never, ever locked. Maria Torres held a small girl's hand. Linda collected donations for a new independently managed emergency fund for abused children, transparently audited to avoid Prentice-style corruption. Chloe Jensen quietly took photographs, not for a paper, but to capture a town's rebirth. Eli stood beside Noah, dressed in new clothes. He didn't turn away. Stood tall, gaze steady, often touching Noah or Nathaniel for reassurance. Noah held his hand tightly. Nathaniel Grayson walked to the new sign, placed his hand on the wood, bowed his head. His presence spoke volumes. Children kept playing their shouts, a hopeful melody. When the ceremony ended, Nathaniel brought the boys to his car. Between them, a new leather-bound journal, Day 1. Have you written anything yet? Noah lifted it. First page is neat handwriting. We will keep writing our story, but this time, no one will have to write in the dark. Eli placed his small hand over Noah's. Nathaniel smiled genuinely. He turned the key. In the rearview mirror, children running bright clothes like wildflowers, laughter trailing. 3 shadows, one tall, 2 small, faded into the warm, promising light of the setting sun, moving toward a new shared future. Justice had found its voice. The children at long last heard, believed, cherished. There are doors in life heavy and rusted shut, one cannot open alone. Behind them lie darkness, pain, silence. But if one person listens, kneels, hears the faint calling, perhaps a life is saved, a bond mended, a society relearns, trust, protection, love. Late afternoon golden sunlight in Nathaniel's garden. Lavender scented the breeze, blending with children's tentative laughter. Nathaniel sat on a bench, eyes closed, a rare peace. His heart, once hollow, slowly filling. Eli scarred, but healing, no longer flinched so violently. Nightmares persisted, dark spaces triggered panic. He hated loud metallic noises, but sometimes he laughed, a light, free sound. For Nathaniel, the most beautiful melody. Eli, during one quiet evening, looking at a photo of Sylvia, had asked Nathaniel, was she like Noah? Nathaniel had just nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Later that week, comforting Eli after a nightmare, he heard a small, sleepy whisper, "It's okay, Dad." The word so simple had undone him. Noah watched Eli, gratitude and love in his eyes. His journey not in vain. His brother free, a home found. Nathaniel watched them, a gentle, weary smile. He who in saving others had inadvertently begun to save himself. His purpose found not in tech empires, but in a sanctuary of love. The story of Noah and Eli, a reminder. Never stay silent when truth is buried, innocence destroyed. Not everyone has the strength to speak out. but a compassionate ear, unwavering trust, protective arms. There a lost child finds courage to rise, reclaim their voice, heal. Nathaniel couldn't save Sylvia from a cry unheard, but he saved 2 others. His grief transformed into meaningful action, regret into life-affirming purpose. In a world where children's voices are drowned out, silenced, we need more like them. Nathaniel, Maria, Chloe, Linda, young Noah. Beacons of compassion, courage. In their actions, our collective hope resides.